They told me Unit 103 had been rented for decades. Same tenant, no complaints. Rent paid on time every single month, without fail. The thing is, no one had actually seen them. Not the landlord, not the maintenance guys, not even the tenant's next door. The blinds were always drawn, the lights always off, and the front door never opened, at least. Not when anyone was watching. When I moved into Unit 102, I didn't think much of it. Old buildings have their ghosts, sure, but most of them are just stories you tell over a drink to give the place some character. Still, there was something about the hallway outside 103. The air felt heavier there, like it carried more years than the rest of the building. My footsteps sounded different too, sharper, like the floor was just a thin layer over something hollow. On my first night, I heard it. A faint sound coming through the wall between my bedroom and theirs. It wasn't music, or a TV, or anything that belonged in an apartment. It was pacing, slow, deliberate, back and forth. I told myself it could be pipes, or an old radiator, or the settling of the building. But the second night, I heard it again, only this time, it stopped the moment I held my breath to listen, and just before it went silent, there was a knock. 3 soft taps against the wall, exactly where my head rested on the pillow. That's when I realized, they knew I was here. I haven't told anyone this before, not a single soul. I've thought about it. Sure, the late-night phone call to a friend, the drunken confession to a stranger in some corner booth, but every time I came close, I'd feel it. That prickle in the air, that weight in my chest. Like whatever lives in Unit 103 knows I'm about to talk, and it doesn't want me to. I need someone to listen. Really listen. You seem like the kind of person who wouldn't shrug it off, who wouldn't tell me to get more sleep, or stop letting my imagination run wild. You seem like someone who's seen strange things too. The kind you can't explain away with bad wiring or old pipes. I can hear it in the way you're still here, still leaning closer. Promise me something before I go on. Promise me you won't try to find it. I know curiosity can eat at a person. I know the thought of a locked door can gnaw its way into your brain until you just have to see what's behind it. But this isn't like some cabin in the woods where you tell yourself you'll leave if it gets weird. This is different. This is a thing that doesn't care if you believe in it. And if you go looking for it, it will find you first. I moved into Unit 102 about 6 months ago. Cheap rent, decent space, quiet neighborhood. No signal in the back half of the building, but I didn't care. I liked the idea of being a little cut off, like I could leave the rest of the world outside my door. My first week was unremarkable. I unpacked, set up my furniture, and fell asleep each night to the hum of the old radiator. Then came the pacing. Slow, measured steps through the thin wall that separated my bedroom from 103. At first I figured maybe the tenant was just a night owl. Maybe they had insomnia. But I never heard a TV, never heard talking, never heard any sound at all except those footsteps. And they weren't random. They moved back and forth. Always the same number. Always stopping in the same place. The creepy part wasn't the noise itself. It was the way it reacted to me. If I turned over in bed or shifted my weight on the mattress, the pacing would pause. If I held my breath, the room next door would hold its breath too. It wasn't like overhearing someone. It was like sharing the same air. Like we were breathing in sync through a wall that wasn't really there. I asked the landlord about it once, casually, pretending I was just making small talk. He froze in that way people do when they're deciding whether to lie or to tell you something you'll wish you didn't know. Then he shrugged and said, 103's always been rented. Don't worry about it. And that was that. No name, no history, nothing. Nights got harder after that. The pacing started later and lasted longer. Sometimes I'd wake up and hear it right next to my headboard, as though the steps had crossed the invisible line between apartments. There were no shadows under the door, no lights through the blinds, but I knew something was standing on the other side of that wall. I stopped sleeping well. Some nights I wouldn't sleep at all, just lying there in the dark, listening. I started hearing other things too, soft thumps in the hallway, a slow dragging sound like someone's hand sliding along the wall outside my apartment. A few times I thought I heard knocking, but not on my door. It came from inside the wall. It's hard to explain what that does to you. The first few nights you tell yourself it's nothing. A building like this is old, wood shifts, metal expands, and contracts. Neighbors move around. But when the sounds react to you, when they pause, when you pause, start when you start, match the rhythm of your breathing, you stop telling yourself it's random. You start wondering what happens if you knock back. I never did. Not then. But I thought about it. And here's the thing. Once you notice it, you can't go back to not noticing. You start looking at the hallway differently, listening for the faintest movement when you walk past 103's door. You start noticing how no one ever comes or goes from that unit. No packages, no groceries, no mail. The blinds never move. And yet, it's rented. It's always been rented. You're probably wondering why I didn't just move out. I've asked myself the same thing. Maybe I thought I could figure it out. Maybe I thought if I understood it, I could control it. Or maybe, and I hate to admit this, part of me wanted to know who or what was in there. But here's what I've learned. You don't go looking for the thing behind the wall. Because if you do, you might find it's already been looking for you. That's why I'm telling you all of this now. Not because I think you can help me, and not because I need to get it off my chest. I'm telling you because it's getting worse. And if you hear your own version of 103, if you ever hear footsteps when you should be alone, or knocking from somewhere that shouldn't be hollow, you'll know not to open the door. You'll know not to listen too closely, and you'll know not to knock back. The building I live in isn't much to look at from the outside. 3 stories, faded brick, fire escape clinging to the back like a spine. There's a small lobby with a row of battered mailboxes, most with names scratched off or papered over. The floors creak no matter how lightly you walk, and the stairwell smells faintly of damp plaster and something older, like the ghost of smoke from decades ago. It's the kind of place that feels tired but stubborn, the kind of place that's seen too much to be surprised by anything anymore. Unit 103 sits on the first floor, tucked into a short hallway with only 3 other doors. The hallway light has been out since before I moved in. The landlord says the wiring's fine, but the bulb always burns out within a day of being replaced. Now there's just the single emergency light at the far end, flickering in a way that makes shadows seem to breathe. You can't walk down there without feeling like something's watching from behind the closed doors. There are rumors, of course. Old buildings always have them. Mrs. Lang from 201 swears she's heard a baby crying from 103 in the middle of the night, even though there's no record of children ever living there. Jacob, the guy in 301, says he once knocked to borrow sugar, because apparently people still do that, and the knocking was returned from inside. But slower, measured. 3 taps, a pause, then 3 more. He didn't stick around to see if the door opened. You learn quickly that the tenants don't linger in that hallway. People pass by fast, eyes forward, like they're walking past a dark alley in a bad part of town. My own encounters started small. Sometimes, when I came home late, I'd hear movement from inside as I passed 103. Not loud, just the faint shuffle of feet or the creak of floorboards. I'd slow down, listening, and the sound would stop instantly, as if whoever was inside had frozen mid-step. The first truly strange thing happened about 2 weeks in. I was carrying groceries past 103 when I dropped my keys. They slid under the door just far enough that I had to crouch to reach them. And when I did, I saw something. Not clearly, just the faintest reflection in the sliver of black between the door and the floor. It looked like an eye. Not wide open, not blinking. Just there, watching me from the other side. I told myself it was a trick of the light, but it kept happening. Not the eye, exactly, but the sense of being observed. If I lingered too long in the hall, the air felt heavier, like a storm was pressing down on it. Sometimes I'd feel warmth on the back of my neck, like someone had just exhaled close. To me, I'd turn around, and there'd be nothing. Inside my own unit, things were mostly normal, at first. Then little details began to shift. I have this old clock in my living room, battery-powered, nothing fancy. It started stopping at odd times, not running slow, just freezing. Always at 3:07 a.m., I'd replace the battery, and it would work fine for days before stopping at the exact same time again. I didn't connect it to 103 right away. Why would I? But then I started noticing that the pacing through the wall, the footsteps I heard at night, would always happen after the clock stopped. I'd wake to the silence of the frozen clock, and moments later, the slow, deliberate steps would begin. Other things changed too. The birds outside my window, sparrows mostly, used to start chattering around dawn. Then one morning they didn't. In fact, they didn't make a sound all day. That silence lasted for nearly a week. It wasn't until the pacing stopped for a few nights that I heard them again. I'd like to say I didn't start watching for patterns, but I did. When you live in a place like this, you notice the smallest changes. The way the air feels when you walk in from outside. The way shadows stretch differently, depending on the time of night. The faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen that sometimes cuts out for no reason. And of course, the mirror. I keep one in my hallway, mostly because the lighting there is better than in the bathroom. One night, after hearing the pacing stop abruptly, I stepped into the hallway and glanced at it. I froze. My reflection was there. Same hair, same clothes, but I wasn't moving. I was standing perfectly still, staring straight back at myself, even though my real body was leaning forward slightly. It only lasted a second before the reflection caught up, but it was enough to make me start avoiding that mirror after dark. There's a quiet kind of dread that comes from knowing your home isn't entirely yours, that you're sharing it with something that doesn't need your permission. I started locking my bedroom door at night, even though the only person who could possibly get in was me. I even considered moving my bed to the other side of the room, away from the wall I shared with 103, but it didn't matter. The sound of the pacing wasn't confined to that wall anymore. Sometimes I'd hear it from the kitchen, or from the far end of the living room, like it was wandering through my apartment. Still, I stayed, partly because I told myself I was imagining things, partly because I couldn't afford to break the lease, but mostly because I needed to know. I wanted to understand what was in 103. And why it was so interested in me. Looking back, that was the first mistake. It started with the knocks. The first time, I was half asleep. A soft tapping pulled me back toward consciousness. 3 knocks, slow and even, like someone rapping their knuckles against the wall with deliberate care. They came from the side of my bedroom that bordered 103. I checked my phone. 3:07 a.m. I lay there listening, expecting them to repeat. But instead, I heard the pacing. Soft, deliberate steps, moving back and forth. It wasn't until I sat up in bed that I realized the knocks hadn't come from the wall at all. They'd come from inside my bedroom. I checked every inch of that room, the closet, under the bed, even inside the small crawl space access I'd never noticed before. Nothing. When I finally climbed back under the covers, the pacing had stopped, but the silence was worse. The knocks didn't happen every night after that, but they happened often enough that I started dreading 3:07 a.m. I'd wake just before it, every time, and lie there in the dark, waiting. Sometimes it was just the pacing. Sometimes it was the knocks. Sometimes both. But then other things started happening. Doors would be open in the morning that I knew I'd closed the night before. My kitchen chairs shifted a few inches out from the table. The mirror in the hallway tilted just slightly, as though someone had nudged it while walking past. The worst was the bathroom door. I always left it slightly ajar, enough that the light from the street lamp outside could spill in at night. One morning I woke up, and it was closed. Not just pushed, shut, latched, from the inside. I didn't have the nerve to check it right away. I stood in my bedroom doorway for nearly 10 minutes before finally walking over and turning the handle. It opened easily, swinging inward to reveal nothing. Just the cold tile floor, the sink, the shower curtain hanging still. But the air inside was warmer, like someone had been in there recently. Around that time, the dreams began. They were different from normal dreams, to clear, to rooted in the real. I'd dream of walking through my own apartment, the walls faintly breathing in and out. The sound of footsteps would follow me, always just behind, never matching my pace. When I turned, the hallway would be longer than it should be, and at the end, Unit 103's door would be open. I never saw what was inside. I'd wake up before crossing the threshold, but not before hearing the whisper. Always the same words. Too low to make out, but too deliberate to be nothing. The whisper would follow me into waking, like a song you can't shake. The worst part was when the whispers started lining up with real events. One night I dreamed I heard the words, "Don't look," as I stood in front of my hallway mirror. The next morning, I found a faint handprint on the glass, too small to be mine. Then there was the chair. I only owned two, both heavy enough that you have to actually lift them to move them. I woke one morning to find one of them pressed up against my bedroom door from the inside, angled in such a way that it would have taken time to wedge it there. I live alone. By the time the whispers began, when I was awake, I'd already stopped. Sleeping through the night. I'd be sitting on the couch, trying to focus on some late-night show, when I'd hear it, a soft breath near my ear, followed by that same low, urgent muttering. My skin would crawl, but when I turned, the room would be empty. One evening, I came home to find my apartment door slightly ajar. My first thought was that I'd been robbed, but nothing was missing. Instead, it was as if someone had been there, and wanted me to know it. A single glass was sitting in the center of my kitchen counter, not mine. The escalation reached its peak on a night when the power went out in the entire building. I lit a candle and sat in my living room, listening to the rain outside. The clock had stopped at 3:07 again, and then I heard it, the sound of my bedroom door slowly creaking open. I sat frozen, watching the narrow band of darkness between the door and the frame widen. The pacing started again, not from 103, but from inside my apartment. Closer, louder. The steps came into the living room, and though I could see nothing, the flame of the candle bent slightly, as though something had brushed past it. Then the knocking began, not on the walls, not on the door, but from under the floor, slow, measured, right beneath where I sat. I don't know how long I stayed there, listening. Long enough for the rain to stop, long enough for the lights to flicker back on. And when they did, the hallway mirror had shifted again. Only this time, I wasn't in the reflection at all. The hallway was empty. After that night, I started sleeping with the TV on, hoping the noise would drown it out. It didn't. If anything, the sound of the pacing seemed louder against the low murmur of voices from the screen. And every morning, something would be different. A drawer left open, a book pulled from the shelf, the bathroom door once again closed from the inside. It was no longer just a matter of living next to Unit 103. Whatever was in there, it had crossed over, and I had the sinking feeling it wasn't planning on going back. I think the moment I stopped pretending it was all in my head was the day I found the journal. It was early morning, still dark out, and I'd been up all night listening to the pacing. It had moved through the apartment again, weaving from room to room like it was, searching for something. Around 5, I heard a faint scraping sound from my bedroom. Not the kind that makes you jump, the kind that worms its way into your brain and refuses to leave until you find it. It was coming from under the bed. I got down on my hands and knees, expecting maybe a mouse or something mechanical shifting with the temperature. Instead, I saw a small section of the floorboard lifted just slightly, enough to get my fingers underneath. The wood was cold, too cold for indoors, and when I pried it up, a stale, almost metallic smell hit me. Inside was a thin, leather-bound book. The cover was cracked and warped, the pages yellowed with age. I carried it into the kitchen, sat down at the table, and opened it carefully. The handwriting inside was cramped and uneven, like the writer had been in a hurry or was writing in the dark. The first entries were dated in the late 1970s. They were ordinary at first, notes about rent, neighbors, work. But as the pages went on, the tone shifted. The writer, someone named Daniel, began mentioning Unit 103. He wrote about hearing footsteps at night, about whispers that stopped the moment he tried to listen closely. He described furniture moving, doors opening on their own, and more than once, the feeling of being watched through the wall by the midpoint. The entries were barely legible. The words crammed in as though he'd been desperate to get them down before something interrupted him. There were phrases that repeated over and over. It knows when you're awake. Don't knock back. The wall is not a wall. And then there was one line that made my stomach twist. 103 has never been empty. The final dated entry was from 1981. After that, the journal became stranger. No dates, just scattered sentences, some of them not in English. Some of them scratched so deeply into the paper they'd torn through. The last page held a single word, written in large, shaky letters. Leave. I closed the journal and sat there for a long time. The hum of the refrigerator, the only sound in the room. Daniel's warnings weren't just similar to my experiences. They were identical. The pacing, the whispers, the knocking, all of it. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the line. The wall is not a wall. It got under my skin, the way certain phrases do, echoing until it's the only thing you can hear. Around midnight, I decided to test it. I turned off every light in the apartment, sat in my bedroom, and waited. Right on cue, the pacing began. I let it go on for a while, listening to the rhythm. Then I stood up and pressed my palm flat against the wall. It felt colder than it should have, like touching the glass of a freezer. I tapped it once, softly. The pacing stopped. There was silence for a few seconds, and then slowly, 3 taps came back. I stepped away from the wall, heart hammering, but I couldn't stop. I knocked again, twice this time. The answer came back instantly. 2 taps, closer now, as though whoever, whatever, was on the other side had leaned in. I didn't knock again, but the answering knocks didn't stop. They grew louder, more insistent, until they no longer sounded like knuckles on wood, but something heavier, like fists against thin metal. I backed into the hallway, and that's when I saw it, in the dim light from the street lamp outside. My hallway mirror was different. Again, the reflection of my apartment behind me was wrong. The walls weren't there. In their place was a narrow corridor stretching far into darkness, and at the end of it, a door. I don't know how long I stood there staring, but at some point, the sound of the knocking shifted. It wasn't coming from the wall anymore. It was coming from inside the corridor in the reflection then. For the first time, the door in the reflection opened. I didn't see a person. What I saw was absence. A shape where a person should be, but made of nothing at all. And yet I knew it was looking at me. I could feel it, the same way you can feel someone's gaze in a crowded room. The mirror went back to normal in a blink. But I knew then that Daniel had been right. The wall wasn't a wall. It was a boundary, and whatever was in 103 could step across it whenever it wanted. I thought about leaving that night, but as I was packing a bag, I noticed something carved into the inside of my apartment door. It hadn't been there before. 4 words, etched deep into the wood. It still hears you. That was the moment I realized that moving out wouldn't help. It wasn't about the apartment anymore. I waited until morning to leave. I don't know why. Maybe I thought daylight would make it easier. Like whatever was in 103 wouldn't follow me under the sun by the time I stepped out into the hall. The emergency light was flickering again. The air felt thick, like walking into a room after someone's been smoking in it for hours. I passed 103 without looking at it. I didn't need to. I could feel it there. My plan was simple. Go to my sister's place, 2 towns over. Stay there until I figured out what to do next. I threw my bag over my shoulder and headed for the lobby. But when I stepped outside, I froze. It was quiet. Not just normal city morning quiet. Not the distant hum of traffic or the occasional barking dog, but a smothering, unnatural silence. The street was empty. No cars, no people. Even the air felt still. I started walking. My car was parked just around the corner. But when I turned it, the street stretched on farther than it should have. The familiar corner store was gone. The row of houses replaced by an unbroken wall of brick that looked like it had been there for decades. I told myself I'd taken a wrong turn, even though I knew I hadn't. I walked faster, turning another corner, then another. But no matter which direction I went, I kept ending up back in front of my building. The 4th time it happened. I saw a movement in one of the windows of 103, just a flicker, but enough to make me stop. Something was standing there, just behind the glass. I couldn't see its face, but I knew it was watching me. I don't remember going back inside, but somehow I was in the hallway again, my bag still on my shoulder. The door to 103 was open just a crack, wide enough for darkness to spill out into the hall like smoke. I should have run, but instead, I stepped closer. The air grew colder with each step until I could see my breath hanging in front of me. There was a sound coming from inside, not the pacing this time, but a low, steady hum, like machinery running deep underground. I put my hand on the doorknob. It was ice cold, so cold it burned, and when I pushed the door open, there was no apartment inside, just the same narrow corridor I'd seen in the mirror, stretching into darkness. The hum grew louder as I stepped across the threshold. The air smelled faintly metallic, like blood on old pennies. My footsteps echoed, even though the floor didn't look like it should carry sound. I don't know how far I walked. Time felt strange in there. I passed doorways on either side, each leading to rooms I didn't want to see. I kept my eyes forward, but sometimes I caught glimpses, a figure standing just out of sight, a shadow bending in the wrong direction, a chair rocking slowly in an empty room. Eventually, the corridor ended at another door. This one was different, heavier, older. Carved into it were the same words I'd found on my apartment door. It still hears you. I don't remember opening it. I only remember stepping through, and then I was back in my apartment. Same couch, same kitchen. My bag was still by the door, but something was off. The light from the windows felt wrong, too dim, like it was filtering through water. The hum was still there, faint but constant, vibrating in my bones. I checked the hallway. 103's door was closed again. Everything looked exactly the way it should, but I knew it wasn't. Not really. That was 3 days ago. I haven't tried to leave again. Not because I'm trapped. I've opened my front door and stepped outside. But no matter where I go, the grocery store, the park, the corner where the bus stops, there's always a moment when I look up and see the building, and 103's window, and the figure watching me. Sometimes at night, I hear footsteps in the corridor again, not in the wall, not in my apartment, in me, like something is pacing inside my skin, testing the space, getting comfortable. I think about Daniel a lot, about the journal. I used to wonder what happened to him after that last entry. Now I think I know. I don't think you really leave 103. I think you just carry it with you. I haven't been able to sleep since that night. Not really. I close my eyes, and maybe I get an hour, sometimes 2, but it's never deep. It's never the kind of sleep where you wake up rested. And every time, without fail, I dream of the corridor. It doesn't matter where I am, my bed, a hotel, even once when I dozed off on a friend's couch, I see the same dim, endless stretch of hallway, and I hear that low, mechanical hum. Sometimes I'm walking toward the heavy door at the end. Sometimes I'm already standing in front of it, hand hovering over the handle. But I never open it in the dream. I think that's the only reason I'm still here to tell you this. I still hear the pacing, not from 103 anymore, not even from my apartment. It's closer now. Sometimes it's behind me when I'm washing dishes. Sometimes it's in the next room while I'm getting dressed. And once it sounded like it was inside the walls of my chest, the rhythm faint but undeniable. I've stopped trying to explain it to myself. I know what I saw, I know what I felt, and I know what's still with me. You seem like someone who's seen strange things too. That's why I've kept talking this long, because maybe you'll understand. Or maybe you'll be smart enough to do the one thing I didn't. Walk away before it notices you. I keep thinking about those words carved into my door, into that final door in the corridor. It still hears you. I don't think they were meant as a warning to keep quiet. I think they were telling me it's already too late. Sometimes I wonder if I've been replaced. If the me sitting here now isn't the same one who stepped into 103 that night. Maybe I left more of myself behind than I realized. Maybe the part of me that came back isn't complete. And if that's true, then where's the rest of me? I want to tell you to forget everything I've said, but that would be a lie. You can't forget once, you know. You can try, but it's there in the back of your mind, waiting for a quiet moment to surface. That's how it starts. Just a thought, just a sound you think you imagined. And then you start noticing the little things, the wrong things. If you ever see that door, the real one, or the one in the reflection, promise me you won't open it, even if you hear something on the other side. Even if it knocks back. Especially if it knocks back. And if you ever find 103, burn it. Don't stay. Don't explore. Don't wonder who's inside. Just walk away and pray you didn't stay long enough for it to learn your steps. Because once it does, you're not walking alone anymore, and you never will again. You've been quiet this whole time, just listening. That's good. But now, I have to ask you something. Have you ever noticed something in your home wasn't where you left it? A chair moved, a door closed, a shadow in a place it shouldn't be. Did you tell yourself you'd just forgotten that there was a reason? Or maybe you've heard it, the kind of sound you can't explain, a knock that comes at the same time every night, footsteps when you're supposed to be alone, a voice, low and close, saying something you can't quite make out. If you have, I want to hear it. I want to know I'm not the only one who's marked. Tell me what happened. Leave it here, in the comments, where someone else might see it and recognize themselves in it. And if nothing like this has happened to you, if you think you're safe, then I need you to listen even closer. You might not have noticed yet, but it notices you. It's always looking for new doors. So if you've ever stayed in a place that felt wrong, if you've ever been drawn to a room you've never entered, promise me you won't go inside. Promise me you won't knock back. Because maybe, just maybe, reading this, hearing this, remembering this, is enough for it to hear you. And if you hear something tonight, a knock, a step, a whisper, just remember, you let it in.